In this tutorial, we're going to be looking at the bouncing ball exercise. Now, the bouncing ball exercise has been done since day one of animation, pretty much. It's a great sort of tool to just get a feel for how to work with animation principles such as squash and stretch. It also lets you work with anticipation, where the ball will hang in the air for a bit. I'll be able to show you that when we get further into the actual animating the object. So, now I'm assuming that people have already opened up Maya before. If not, there's some great tutorials in the learning movies here, which will open up when you first open Maya, and it will go over the basics such as pan, zoom, roll. But I'm going to assume that you've checked out that. You know a little bit about Maya, you know how to spin the world around, zoom in and out, all this sort of basic stuff. So I'm going to start with a new scene, and we're creating a ball. So I'm going to create a polygon sphere, which is found just up in the corner here, and I'm just going to drag that onto the grid. Now, at the moment, it's in wireframe mode, and it's a little hard to see what's going on. So we're going to come up here to the smooth shaded mode up here, and that'll just fill in the wireframe, make it a little easier to look at. So over here we've got the X, Y, Z coordinates, which just says about where the ball is in the 3D space. So we're going to try and be nice and neat for this tutorial and put it at the origin. Also here we're going to give it a radius of 1, just to keep things nice and neat. Now, so we've got our polygon sphere, but we know that it is a ball, so we're going to call it ball. It's always a good idea to get into the habit of naming objects as you go, or else you end up with a whole heap of random stuff and you're looking at it, you're like, I have no idea what I've just done or what's connected to what, and you just want to avoid confusion because it can get confusing quite easily. So we're going to clean everything up. So here the ball has the input as the polysphere, which tells you about the subdivisions and the radius. Now we've set that to what we want, so what we're going to do is go to Edit, Delete by Type, History. Now that's not going to make a whole lot of difference at the moment, but once you start working on larger projects, if you have a whole heap of history in listed underneath each of your objects, then it's going to really slow down your workflow. So it's good to get into the habit of that. So we have our ball at origin, and what we want it to do is bounce on this grid here. Now, to get it to do that, we want it to be sitting on top of the grid. And now, because we know that our ball has a radius of exactly 1, we can put in 1 into the translate Y, and we will now know that it is sitting exactly on the grid. Now, for when we're animating, we also want to be squashing and stretching. So by hitting the R key, or over here on the side, you get your scale tool. And so if you just do a bit of a test scale there, you'll notice that the ball will actually bring itself up off the ground, which is going to make it a little difficult in terms of animating, because we'll have to start counter animating where the ball is hitting the ground each time whenever it's squashing, because the actual placement of the ball will change. So what we want to do is, if we hit W again to bring back our transform tool, and then from there, if you hit the insert key, you'll get the effect pivot tool. Now what we want to do there is, if you come up to the top, you have these absolute values. If we type in 0, that is going to drop our pivot to the ground, and if you hit W again, you'll get your transform tool back, and also if you cycle through, you rotate and scale, you'll also find that everything is sitting at the bottom, which is going to help us out a lot with this. And to keep things clean, we want the ball, where it is now, to be at 0, 0, 0. So if we right click on the channel box and come down to freeze, we can just go along to freeze translate, and that will recenter where the ball is. So that puts it down to being at the origin. So from here we can, well, we'll make the ball bounce. I'm going to be working in 24 frames a second, just because that's industry standard for film. So that will be my default settings, but if you need to change that for any reason, you've got down the right hand corner, you've got your animation preferences. If you click on that, it will bring up this dialog window. Now, by default, if you click on settings, it'll already be at 24 frames a second, which is what we're going to keep it at, but if you're working in PAL or NTSC, you can easily change that here, but we're going to stay at 24. So we'll hit save those settings. And now we'll give us a couple more frames because a second isn't really going to be enough. Let's just plug in 100 for now. We'll probably crop that down later on just to fit the animation that we come up with. So for the ball to start bouncing, you want to start it off at some sort of height. So we're going to drag it up, and I'm thinking 12 is looking good. I'll try and work in whole numbers at the start anyway to help people get the exact same results as I'm getting. So that's all set in. Now what you can do is you can hit S and that will set a key. Now it's going to set a key on everything, which is fine for now. We can work with that. And so if we scrub along the time bar, we'll say, okay, 12 frames, bring us here. And what you can do from now is to drop this down to 0 and then set another key. But what I like to work with is turning on the auto key toggle here. So if we turn that on, it means whenever we do something, it will automatically set a key on whatever attribute we change. So I'm going to come here and say, okay, I want that to go back to 0, which puts it exactly on the ground, which is where we want it. And you'll notice that down here, these little red lines are your keys. So that was the first one we set, and then this is the one that it's set automatically when I change the value of Y. So that's great. We have our ball. It just kind of drops to the ground. Now we want it to start bouncing. So we'll come across to, we'll say frame 22 and bring it up. We probably want to go to around 6 or 7. I'm going to plug in 7. And again, that sets another key. And then if we scrub along, if you type in 0, the attribute will stay highlighted. So this will make it quite easy to just drag along in the time slider and just keep on adding in values. So we're going to go to, let's say 3 for now, and then drag along a bit further, go back down to 0, and then keep dragging along. We'll go to 1, and then 0, and then 0.2, and we'll finish back down at 0. So this is the basic movement. This is what's known as setting keyframes. So you just go through and set every key position that the ball is going to hit. And now what we can do is, using the keys down here, is rewind it back to the start and play it through. And as we noticed, that is absolutely flipping out. So what's actually going on there is it is playing through every frame as fast as it can, which is not what we want to see here. We want to see everything playing at real time. So if we right click on our play button and then come across to playback speeds, you'll notice that it's currently set to play every frame free. And because there's not much in the scene, it can play these frames really, really quickly, and that's why the ball was just freaking out. So we're going to click on real time, and now we should be having the ball playing back at the correct speed. So I'm going to hit play, and you look at that and go, wow, that is an absolutely terrible bouncing ball, which is very understandable because we're just getting started. So we want to fix up this very silly kind of looking movement. You'll notice the main problem that's going on here is that the ball is decelerating as it's getting to the ground, which it really shouldn't do. If you drop an object, it will actually gain speed as it gets closer, not slowing down right at the end. And that's why you're getting this really floaty sort of look, which we're going to get rid of now. So if you come over to the left-hand side, you'll see that you've got the perspective and graph button here, which all these buttons here will change your viewport. So we're going to have a look at the perspective and graph. Now, in animating, the graph editor, which is this part down here, is your greatest friend. Now we're going to just hit F, which will frame up everything, and you'll see here, if we scrub through, how the ball comes down, and you can actually see in the graph that it decelerates just before it hits, and that's what we want to get rid of. So you can marquee select here, so if you just drag across all these bottom keys along here, the little black dots, you'll see that they've all come up highlighted, and we want to get rid of this deceleration. So what we're going to do is come up to this button here, which creates linear tangents, and we're going to click that. And if you see, that's already helped it a lot, because the ball will keep speeding up until it hits the ground, and then it will stay at a fast rate and then taper off as it gets to the height, and then start falling back down again, which is much closer to what we're looking at. But if we play through, yeah, that's starting to look all right, but what we can do is just tweak it a little bit more. So we're going to select, let's select this one here and those two handles. Now what we want to do is be able to drag these in to create a sharper bounce, and this will give us a much more cartoon sort of feel. So if we drag that, you'll notice it's actually moving both of them at the same time, which is just completely messing with what we want to do. So I'm going to undo that, and I'm going to come over here to the break tangents, hit that button, and you'll notice that these change color. And so what that means, once I unselect that, what that means is you can select one of these at a time and move it without changing the other. And so we can move this from left to right and create a really nice arc. And then we can come along and do that for the other one here. And so as you can see, we've got this much nicer set of curves. So we're just going to go along and do that for each of these. And just adjust that till it looks nice. Along here. Again. And the great thing about this is that within 3D packages, it's really easy to just chop and change what you've been working on. So if you feel like tweaking something later on, you always can. If I just select this key here, I can actually move that up and down quite easily. So if I decide that this first bounce, if I think that that's going far too high, I can just click on that, and then if I hold down the Shift key and the middle button, you'll get this icon that looks like a bit of a question mark. Now what that's doing is saying that you're about to move this key, but it will only move it in one axis. So if I start moving down, it will only allow me to move up and down, and no matter if I go left and right. And the same thing is if I want to go left or right. It's just whichever direction you move it first, it will lock onto that axis. So now we've got this nice sort of bounce. We're going to rewind it to the start and check out what it looks like. Okay, so this is looking much nicer. We've got this nice sort of anticipation where the ball hangs in the air, and this is great for just seeing how anticipation works to help create a likable animation. So what we're going to do is just come along and have a look at some of these frames. I'll notice that this bounce here, that isn't looking very even, it's looking a little lopsided. So what I'm going to do is if I click in the time slider here, while I'm holding down Shift, I can drag across and everything that's highlighted in red I now have selected. And what I can do is just bump that back a frame. And so now you'll see that that curve is looking much nicer and neater. And we'll play that back. There we go. And so this is nice. Got something here, but it's a little ordinary. At the start of the tutorial, I was mentioning about using squash as well. So we're going to have a bit of a look at that next.